Well, thank you very much, Bethany. It is great to have you all here. Thank you for registering. We are going to get started on a topic that is very, very timely and very, very near and dear to the hearts of all of us here that are presenting. So with that, today we're going to go through the psychology of investing. We have a very, very special guest named Derek Hagan. He will present himself and introduce himself a little more formally. My name is Thomas Pargett. I serve as a managing director for the private client division with Bergen KDV, and I'm out of our Omaha office. With me is my colleague, Ian O'Brien.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ian O'Brien. I'm a senior education specialist with the Retirement Plan Solutions team here at Bergen KDV. And what I do is I work with our clients to help educate their employees about their finances, including doing one-on-one consultations with them about their retirement plans. I'm really excited to have Derek here today because a lot of what he's going to be talking about is reflected in conversations that I have with people about their finances and kind of the way that they think through decisions that they make. So Derek, thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
See, Thomas, it's great to be here. I'm Derek Hagan, as they said. I'm a financial psychology expert, financial therapist. I work with people who have something in between where they want to go and where they are, and I help people get beyond what's keeping them stuck, and I help them design and live meaningful lives and use their money as a tool to reach that. And to get started, I thought I'd share a story. So I want to take you back to the early 1990s. I'm sitting in a class in middle school, it's math class, and I'm bored out of my mind. I'm staring up at the clock. And now some of you might not remember, but we used to have these big circles with 12 numbers on it and a couple of little sticks, and that's how we determined what time it was. And I'm staring at this clock, waiting for class to be over, because I can't handle it. I'm falling asleep. It's just way too boring. Finally, the bell rings. I get up, make my way towards the door. Teacher pulls me aside, and nothing good can come from this, right? I'm being pulled across the class to talk to the teacher, but he finally tells me, look, I know you're bored. You're not struggling. You're not challenged. I'm going to bring you down to the advanced math class. So I enter advanced math, where I'm in with people who are a little bit more on par with how I think about math. Math is fun. It's a little more challenging, and I still enjoy it. So 10 years later, I still have this math bug, and I'm in college and I'm studying finance and I'm studying economics. And these are two fields that are very quantitative. That is, they're very math heavy, but they also involve money. So in my head, I'm starting to piece together this idea that money is just math. In fact, I used to say, finance is just applied mathematics. I used to say this like I was some kind of big person. Finance is just applied mathematics. About the same time I'm going through these classes, I start working at a bank, and I was a teller, and teller is the T in ATM. You used to have to go into the bank to do your banking, to put your money in or get your money out. As I'm working with my customers, I'm silently judging them. I'm looking at their situation and wondering to myself, don't they know how this math works? I'm looking at somebody who's got no money in their checking or savings. They got money in a credit card. And I think this is simple math. Don't they know to stay in a surplus? Keep your expenses less than your income. This is just basic math. You must not understand how math works. Or the person who's got $20,000 in their savings account and $10,000 in a car loan. And I think, well, this is simple math. Take money from the savings, pay off the car loan, pocket the interest rate differential, and you free up your cash flow. This is simple. Don't you know how the math works? And on it goes. Judging people for not understanding the math of how this stuff works. Well, eventually I get to some high level classes. They're taking a lot of my energy, and I can't work as much. I'm hourly at the bank. So if I stop working, I don't make as much money. And hourly, you lose your hours, you lose your paycheck. Okay, well, the math says income goes down, expenses should go down. Keep myself in surplus. That's the math. That's what I was judging people with, but I didn't, because I spun myself a story that said, well, I'm going to be moving from Fargo to Minneapolis soon, and when I do, I'm a really big deal. So people are going to want to hire me, pay me a lot of money, or wipe out this debt, no problem. So I supplement my expenses with credit card debt, and I rack it all up, and I move down to the Twin Cities, and I get a job, but it's not the job I hoped. It was in a big bank, trying to sell subprime mortgages to people. This is 2005, 2006. And boy, did I hate that job. This was the worst. So I finally left, but I still have to live in a more expensive city than Fargo now. No income, living my life as if I do, plus credit card debt from when I was in college, plus student loans. And finally, I wake up one day and I realize, what is going on? I am that person that I was judging. I am that person that I used to make fun of. So this is the point where I realized that this personal finance stuff is a lot more than just math, because I'm the person that knows the math. And I still ended up in this situation with 5 figures of debt and no income and still living far beyond my means. And that's what we're going to talk about today is what's the other side besides the numbers that applies to this money stuff. And to start thinking about why is it not just math? We can think about how our brain works. And so I tried to get a really good scan, a really precise scan of inside of our brains. And I came up with this picture here. Well, this is the wrong number. This isn't a brain scan. This is the whole wrong thing. But this works kind of like a good analogy. This elephant, you can think of this like the subconscious part of your mind. This is automatic. This is default mode. And if you studied behavioral finance, which I don't know how many of you would, there's a thing called a fast brain, system 1 brain. This is the automatic brain that makes 95% of your daily decisions, right? This is the part of your brain that decides to pump your blood, or this is the part of your brain that decides to blink or swallow or sweat. This is completely automatic. Now, sitting on top of this elephant is a rider. And this rider is kind of the more deliberate, conscious brain. And when you think about me or you think about I, this is what you're thinking about. You're thinking about the rider on top of this elephant. This is far slower, and this is more deliberate. And when people talk about something coming up into conscious awareness, this is the rider making that decision.
Hey, Derek, I'm gonna jump in for a second. We've got some technical difficulties. It looks like your slides are not changing. We still see the first slide.
You see an elephant and a rider, or you see?
We see the psychology of investing, the title slide.
Okay. Let me try again. Let's see if we can troubleshoot this.
There we go. All right, so now we're to title.
Title page, elephant.
Elephant.
Elephant. Okay. So
subconscious.
Just to reiterate, this elephant that hopefully you can see now represents the subconscious part of your brain, makes 95% of the decisions. This is automatic and so on. Sitting on top of that is the rider that hopefully you can see. And this rider represents the conscious part. So thanks for bringing that up. And again, please let me know if anything isn't working or if I need to back up. So in any case, when we're in normal times, this is a good system. This works just fine. The rider can control the elephant. The rider and the elephant, they work together as one team. Everything is great. But if something scares the elephant, if something spooks the elephant, that is in times of high stress, that rider is not along or is not in control anymore and is just along for the ride, trying to hang on. That is something we call emotionally flooding. If you're emotionally flooded, it is your elephant, it is your subconscious mind that is in control, making the decisions. And the elephant doesn't know anything about the future, it doesn't know anything about promises you've made, doesn't know anything about consequences. All it knows is right now, I need to get out of this situation immediately. And so it says and does things that the rider is going to later regret. And you might have experienced this if you've ever been in a heated argument with your partner or say a teenage child, or maybe when you were a teenager with your siblings or your parents. But what happens? You get 20, 30 minutes later, after the emotional flood leaves, the chemicals are gone, the rider gets back on and says something to the effect of, what just happened? Why did we say that? Why did I say that? Why did I do that? I didn't mean that. That was really dirty. I shouldn't have done that. But that's because the rider wasn't making that decision. So emotional flooding is when the elephant part of our mind, the fast thinking part of our mind, the mind or the part of the mind that makes 95% of the decisions, is in control, not even thinking about the future.
Derek, I want to just ask you a question here. So if I understand you correctly, it sounds like you're saying that our brain basically works in 2 different ways. And we have one part of our mind that's conscious, that we're aware of, where we're kind of deliberately thinking through things, perhaps logically thinking through things. And there's another part of our brain that is kind of operating subconsciously, that's just, making split-second decisions. I guess one question I would have here then is if that part of our brain isn't conscious, if it's not something we're aware of, then how can we know when that part of our brain has taken over?
A great question, and we can't know. That's the short answer. And so if I may add a couple more examples to show how this works. If there are any athletes watching, muscle memory is when you take something from the rider and you train the elephant. So if you have something that you do repetitively and you have to think about the first time you drove a car, now that's not athletics, but it's the same idea. First time you were shooting that basket, you really had to think about what you were doing. But eventually you got used to it and the elephant takes over so that you don't have to have that conscious awareness anymore. So there is some muscle memory and learning how to do things without really thinking about it. You can drive your car now while listening to a podcast or having a conversation with somebody. So I don't want to suggest that we don't want the elephant working. Where we can get into trouble is when the rider no longer has any control. And so I think to Ian's question, how will I know if the rider's not in control? And the answer is I won't until after. But with practice, you can start to learn when you were starting to become emotionally flooded. So if your anger or your sadness or the level of emotion is getting up to a 5 or 6 out of a 10, you can start to maybe call a timeout and say, I need to take a break. Or if you have a partner, a spouse that you're working with, you can get permission to call a timeout on each other. Something to the effect of, looks like this is getting a little bit heated. I propose we take a little bit of a break. So in the moment, in the emotional flood, I don't want to say never, very, very difficult to know that you're in that though, but you can learn when you are starting to lose control, when your rider is starting to lose control. So the elephant, again, which makes most of our decisions, how does this work? So I want to talk about how the elephant really prefers speed. It wants to make a quick decision because often we inherited our minds from ancestors who had to make really quick decisions that were life or death. So when we think about how this elephant works, how the fast thinking part of our brain works, it's trying to balance being right and being fast. And in a perfect world, it's going to be right all the time and it's going to be fast all the time. But there's always going to be a trade-off here, and it's always going to trade speed for accuracy. Because if I'm wrong on the accuracy side, okay, well that's maybe not the best thing in the world, but if I'm wrong on the speed side, if I didn't get out of a situation that I needed to get out of, that's potentially bad. And so these cognitive biases, these are part of how our brains take in and interpret information. This applies to every single person. This applies to me, Ian, Thomas, everybody. The best we can do is become aware of these biases because you cannot teach yourself out of these. This is just how our brain works. So I thought I'd go through kind of some of the more common biases, the common ways that our brains trick us by trading speed for accuracy. And so there's just a few biases that I want to talk about. The first one is something called the negativity bias. And the negativity bias says there's a lot of good things that happen out there in the world. There's a lot of good things that happen to you. There's a lot of good things that happen in the day, but we do not see them. We don't notice them. We don't remember them. But that one criticism, we'll remember that. The one thing that didn't go right, we will remember that. We will notice it. We're going to notice it faster, and we're going to remember it longer. So if you're working, if you remember going in for a performance review, say that your manager could have said, this is good and this is good, and you're always on time, you brought in business, you streamlined the practice and so on, but, and then that one bad thing, that's the one thing that you're talking about for the rest of the day. Because we pay more attention to the bad. And again, there's an evolutionary basis for this. And it says that we had to take, the elephant for sure, had to pay more attention to threats. Because if I see a stick, but I think it's a snake, then I'm going to run away. And the worst thing that's going to happen if I run away is I'm going to get embarrassed. But I survive until tomorrow to get embarrassed again. But if I see a snake and I think it's a stick and I try to go walk over it, that's not necessarily going to work out very well for me. That could be a multiplied by 0 situation, game over. So we had to pay more attention to the threats because the consequences of missing a threat are greater than the consequences of missing an opportunity. So just know that we walk around the world and we are hypersensitive to the negative side of the world, which leads me to something called loss aversion. And loss aversion says we are averse to losses. That is to say, if I make $1,000, that feels pretty good. You know, whatever this feels pretty good. But if I lose $1,000, same amount, that hurts me twice as much. A pain hurts me twice as much as a gain feels good. We don't like to lose what we have. We will fight harder and longer to keep something that we already have than we will to go get something that we don't have. That has some implications with investing, and I think, you were going to say something. Sorry.
Yeah, if I could just jump in here really quickly, I see this so often because I take a lot of phone calls from people who, you know, you have questions about their investments in their 401k plans or concerns or whatever they are. And I can tell you, I take so many more phone calls during market downturns like the one that we're experiencing right now and have been for most of this year than I do otherwise. I think, you know, people just seem to pay so much more attention to like their investments having lost a value of 10% or more than they ever do to their investments being up, you know, 20% in a year. You know, and the really concerning thing about that is then, you know, that fear, that reaction that they have, oftentimes that causes them to do things that might in the long run actually really hurt them, like sell their investments at a loss because of this reaction that they have.
Sure, and even if, and so how that happens is we make money in a year, you know, maybe the market's up 10% or our portfolio is up 10%. And again, that feels good. That's the left side of this chart. Yeah, that feels cool. And back to the negativity bias, maybe I don't even notice that I was up 10% because I got other things going on. And then the next year I'm up 15%, and then I'm up 5%. And that goes largely unnoticed. And if I notice it, yeah, it feels pretty good. But then if there's a down market, boy, do I feel that. And it's just, it resets too. Every time that we get a new year, we reset the value of our portfolio. So even if maybe I started with $1,000 and then I made money and it was up to $2,000 and then I lost a quarter of my money. And so now I'm down at $1,500. I feel that $1,500, well, I feel the loss of the $500, even though I still made $500. I'm still up from where I started, but it feels bad because my reference point is to what the most that I had before. And that's both loss aversion and the negativity bias at play.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So that's a good segue into when I lose money, I look around. Humans are meaning-making machines. We're trying to make sense of things that happen. We're very uncomfortable with uncertainty. So once something happens, you know, once the elephant does something or once an outside event happens, the rider needs to know why. And so it tries to piece together what just happened. So the next bias I want to talk about is hindsight bias. And hindsight bias says that when we're looking into the future, there are an infinite number of ways that this future can go. Completely, it's a crapshoot. You roll the dice. We don't know what's going to happen. After a particular event has happened, it is very easy now to look back and say, oh, I knew that the whole time. This is very obvious. I knew it, except the thing is you didn't know it. And it's only now with the benefit of the event having happened that we get to look back and then piece together why it happened. So this is very, very common and very hard to talk ourselves out of.
To jump in, this is absolutely probably the biggest bias that my team and I see and we work around and we educate around. But the two of the more recent examples that I've had a lot of discussion around with clients and prospective clients around the country are COVID, so 2020, everything in 2020 basically, and then this year's inflation market, or whatever we're calling it. You know, in March of 2020, it was really easy to look and say, hey, I mean, didn't we see this coming? I mean, we heard about COVID a couple months ago. It cropped up in China. Like, didn't we know this was going to be a really big deal in the US and the markets were going to respond? It was, I mean, of course, right? We saw that, and we said that in maybe late March, April, May, June. But the answer was no. I mean, nobody saw that coming. But it was very clear to see after the fact, and nobody knew how we were going to react necessarily. And then the same with this one. This market this year has been a lot of the same, just questions and curiosity around the hindsight and the background of it. I mean, all this money in the system, all the stimulus, low interest rates, housing market. Shouldn't we have seen inflation coming this bad? Like, this was going to be pretty bad. Didn't we see this coming? And the answer is no. I mean, we didn't, not at this level. And I think you can look back at every event in history. Those are just two of the more recent examples, and ask yourself that question and say that you know the answer and the route. And I say that, I tell those stories just to reinforce the fact that this is so common. It's easy for even myself to do, and many personal circumstances to just look back. But this is absolutely one of the bigger biases that my team and I see, especially with some of the more recent events.
Well said. And the only thing that I would add, not the only thing, I mean, it's not enough to know that it was going to happen, right? Because it's very easy to say, couldn't we have seen this coming? Well, yeah. But let's go back further. Let's go back to, say, 2008 or the tech bust. You know, it's after the tech bust, you know, the tech bubble burst. It was easy for people to say, oh my God, of course this was the case. How could we not see this coming? But it's not enough to know it was coming, because you could have known it was coming in the mid 90s, and you still could have knew it was coming in the late 90s, and you still could have known it was coming as we flipped to 2000. So it's only after it breaks that everything falls into place, and we get to see the data points that we're using as justification for why we should have known it. But it is, again, like you said, and to nail that point home, this is just how our minds are operating. When things happen, especially, this never happens on the good side. When an unexpected good thing happens, we never say, oh, I should have seen that coming. It's only when, because of negativity bias, because of loss aversion, that when something bad happens, we want answers, really. Our elephant does. We really want to know how we could have avoided this. And again, there's an evolutionary nature for that. If we can learn from it, we can apply it going forward. But in today's modern world, it doesn't quite work that way.
Yeah.
And the last one of these I want to talk about is it's called the framing effect. And the framing effect says we will interpret information differently depending on how it's framed, depending on how we hear it. So one frame I could put around some kind of maybe a project I'm working on is that it's got a 12% chance of failing, 12% chance of failure, or it's got an 88% chance of succeeding. The math is exactly the same, but it feels a little bit differently. And to use a more common example from the grocery store, I go and I buy, 85% lean meat if I'm going to make a burger tonight. I don't go to the store and ask for the 15% fat, even though it's the same thing. And this is very common too. You'll see this in medical professionals, where there's been studies that show if I see that there's a 1% chance that this might kill somebody, I'm less likely to prescribe it than if it's 99% chance that they're going to be okay. Again, mathematically, it is the same thing. So this is the biggest effect of all of these biases that we've been talking about, and even other ones that I could think of. This is the one that we can most use to our advantage, because the way we frame things to ourselves really makes a big difference. And to get to that point, it's helpful to try to take a step back and understand our thinking process, understand how our minds interpret the world around us. And for this, I want to go back to the basics, ABC here. So ABC represents basically how our mind interprets the world. So think of A as some kind of adverse event or activating event. Something happens. This is outside of our control. And then B says we have some belief about that. And then because of that belief, there's some consequence. And that could be an emotional consequence, like I feel something about it, or it could be a behavioral consequence. I did something about it. Now it's just some simple letters, but it's very impactful because it feels experientially like something happens and then we do something. Something happens and then we feel something about that. That's what it feels like. It feels like it goes straight from A to C. Something happens and I did something. Something happens and I felt something. But the fact that there's this belief in there, and this is your narrative. This is the story that we tell ourselves. When we're talking about money, this is your money script. A money script is a belief that we have about money that dictates all of our behaviors. So it's said another way, that money script, B, is a belief you have about money that dictates all of your actions. C, the consequences, the behavioral consequences. And this story that we tell ourselves often go unchallenged, unchecked. We take them as truth. And that's why it's hard for people to even believe when they first hear about this, that wait a second, well, there is a belief in there. I'm not reacting to the thing itself. I'm reacting to my interpretation of that thing itself. And I'll just use a quick silly example about how the same activating event can lead to completely different consequences. So there's an author named Malcolm Gladwell who was on a podcast interview, and the host asked him about grocery store lines, and the host went off about how he hates going to the grocery store because he always gets in the wrong line. It's the line that takes the longest, and then he moves lines and just never gets through, and he's always the one with the person who wants the price check and writes the check, and it never works out for him. And he's completely irate, and he's looking for Misery Loves Company. He says, Malcolm Gladwell, don't you feel the same way? And Malcolm said, wow, you and I live in different universes, man. I don't think anything like that. I just picked the line that's closest to the last aisle that I was in. So you've got the same activating event, long lines at the grocery store, opposite consequences here. And if they didn't get into this, of course, but if you ask them, what is the belief that you're responding to? And the host is going to have to be honest with himself and say something to the effect of, well, I guess I thought my time was more valuable than everybody else's. And Malcolm Gladwell's belief was, well, this is how grocery stores work. So it's the belief that drives the consequence, the emotion of the behavior, not the thing itself. And once you know that, this is pretty insightful. And there's levels of insight the whole way down. So it starts with C. When you start to lean into this, you're going to notice what you do or what you feel first. And just noticing that is going to put you well above most of the world. Can you recognize how you feel? Can you recognize what you're doing? Then you can go back to the A and ask yourself, well, what triggered this? Why do I feel this, or why did I do that? And again, now you can start to recognize your triggers. You can start to piece together the kinds of things that make you do or say things. And then you can start to ask, okay, well, why did that A cause that C? Why? What story am I telling myself? And you can look into that narrative. Once you do that, you can change this, and add a D to it, which is dispute that belief. So you can start to ask, is there any evidence that this belief in this money script is true? Is there any evidence against it? For example, if a loved one, if your child came to you with the exact same thing happening, how would you counsel your child? Because we don't treat ourselves the same way that we treat others. So you can dispute these beliefs and just see if it's true. Is it helpful to carry on this belief? Is it unhelpful to carry on this belief? So you're just asking questions. You're not judging yourself. You're just asking questions of this. And then finally, you've got E. You've got your effective new belief here. So it's kind of the rescripting process of how you can challenge and rescript your money scripts and just your beliefs in general.
Derek, if I may, this, more than anything else you've talked about so far, this seems like something people could really practically use in their own lives. I'm just kind of wondering as I'm looking at this, in your experience of working with people through some of these things and kind of thinking about things differently, how difficult is this process? I mean, are there any tips that you could provide people that are listening at home to kind of help them through kind of rethinking some of these scripts that you're talking about?
It's simple, but it's not easy. So it's simple because I just put a bunch of letters up on the screen, and they're the first 5 letters of the alphabet. How simple can it be? It's difficult because, so the way I counsel clients is to actually keep a journal or some kind of a log. And when they do it, it's going to be the kind of the same order that I talked about. You're going to notice the C first. You're going to notice what I did or what I felt. Felt afraid. Why? Just check the markets. Okay. And then you get to ask, well, why did checking the markets lead me to feel afraid? And you're going to have to be honest with yourself and say, was it because, well, I think the markets are going to go to zero. I think it's because I'm going to have to give up a little bit of my lifestyle. It's because I'm going to have to work longer, or whatever it is, whatever that belief is. What's the belief that drove the fear in this example? The level of difficulty of becoming aware of the C, that people can get pretty quickly. And then understanding the trigger, that takes some time, but that can get there pretty quickly. Asking yourself and getting clear about what that actual belief is, that's the part that takes some practice. And it can be helpful too, if you're doing this for a while, to not settle for your first answer. So because I feel like I'm not secure. Okay, well, what does that mean? Why do you not feel secure? And you can ask, well, it's because I think I'm going to lose all my money. Okay, well, what does that actually mean? Do you think you're actually going to lose all of your money? And you can keep asking yourself why until you get to that core belief that you're telling yourself. So that's the tricky part. And sometimes it's like holding up a mirror to my face. A mirror doesn't interpret what I look like. It just shows me what's there so that I can do something about it. Sometimes when we look into what the belief is between the event and the consequence, just by articulating it, it can shine the light of absurdity on some of these beliefs that we carry around. Like this podcast host. If I asked him, why did long lines at the checkout line at the grocery store lead you to feel irate? And if he's honest with himself, he's going to say, well, because my time's more valuable than everybody else's. But after he says that out loud, he gets to say, well, of course, that's not true. But these are the beliefs that the elephant has. And you're acting based on what this belief is that the elephant has. This part of learning what the belief is bringing it up into conscious awareness, bringing it up to the level of the rider. And then once it's at the level of the rider, then you can go to the dispute portion of it, into the D. And this is challenging too, because remember, we've carried these beliefs around for a long time. So disputing our own beliefs, although I made it sound simple, is it true? Is it not true? What would you do if your daughter came to you with this? It can be challenging to actually think of counter examples, counterpoints to your belief. So it does take practice. Over time, this becomes a way of thinking. So over time, the clients don't need the log anymore. Not to say that they can't use it, because there's different levels of adversity, but the daily stresses, the daily life becomes integrated, and then they can use this kind of a model for kind of bigger setbacks.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we can apply this kind of to our investing decisions when we think about what does it mean to make an investment? What does it mean to invest money? And I like to help people see this idea of risk and return. It's too common to think that these are two different things. There's risk over here, and then there's return over here. But I want to propose these are the same thing. It's the same coin. And on one side of the coin is expected return, and the other side of the coin is risk. That is to say, risk and return are related. Everybody's looking for this spot over here. This is the spot that shows, you see, it's not very far out on the risk axis, but it's very high up on the expected return axis. Everybody wants this. I want return without any risk. I don't want to take risk, but I want to get rewarded for that. But there's a very technical name for that, and that's called the unicorn. There are no unicorns. This is easy to sell, though. It's easier for me to sell, hey, I've got this, you're not going to get any downside, but there's going to be all this upside. Because the relationship is positive. That is to say, if you want some expected return, if you want to make money, you have to take risk. If you don't want to take risk, you can't expect much for return. So it's not to say that there's not an investment out there with unicorn level risk. There is. You just have to take and accept less return for it. Or if you want unicorn level expected return, you have to take some more risk to get that. So these two concepts are very, very related. So if I want low risk, I can't expect much for return. If I want high return, I have to take some risk. Now, when I talk about risk is and return, both of these concepts are long-term, they're long-run related. So in any given time, in any given day, in every given year, anything can happen. But over time, we expect taking risk will pay off. And so that's not to say that I'm going to invest in the stock market today and it's risky and I'm going to make a lot of money today, because the return and the risk are related. It's over time. So that's different from down here at this point, where we're taking a lot of risk, but we're not getting much expected return. That's something like gambling. So we're not talking about gambling level risk. We're only talking about risk that the market rewards. And so on this line, we can plot different types of investments, like your savings account. Your savings account has basically no risk, unless you're talking about inflation. I mean, there is some risk, purchasing power risk, but in terms of losing your money, there's no risk to cash as long as you keep it under FDIC levels. And then you can maybe think about investing in bonds. So you take a little bit more risk and you get a little bit more return. In stocks, stocks are way out here. So you take a lot of risk to make more return in stocks. And again, in any given year, in any given quarter, any given hour, this isn't always going to look like this. There are some years where bonds make more than stocks, or when cash makes more than bonds. But this is an over time situation. And when you think about the difference between expected return between stocks and bonds, this is what you accept for, or this is what you get. I'm sorry, this is what you earn by accepting risk. So you're paying, it's like a transaction. I'm giving you risk. I'm telling you that I'm going to take risk, and what I get in return is higher returns. I'll say that one more time. I get returns because I take more risk. So if I go back to that framing effect, it's common for people to think about market volatility, the ups and downs, the volatility, the down markets as a fine. It's a penalty. It's like I'm doing something wrong and I'm being penalized for it. But if we can put a new frame around that and call that a fee, now this becomes the price that we pay in order to get those higher returns. I'm going to say this one more time. Market volatility is not a bug, it is a feature. It is the feature that allows you to make more money. That's the spreadsheets, that's the math side of it. But remember, there's more to investing than just math. So you've seen this presentation, you work with Thomas and Ian, you work with your advisor. So you know that this is just scribbles. This is not any actual real investment, but this is kind of what some investment in a stock might look like. Over time, you're going to get more money, but you have to put up with this risk. Now, a risk is that this isn't even perfectly accurate, because this is only risk if you sell, right? So the downsides of these steep down lines, that is the fee. That is the fee that you pay to get those excess returns. But don't underestimate how hard it is to live in these red circles. Don't underestimate how hard it is to live with watching the news, who's bombarding you with, if it bleeds, it leads type fear mongering. The end of the world is coming. That's what it's going to feel like in these small moments. And then you mix that in with loss aversion, and you mix that in with negativity bias, and this becomes very difficult to weather the storm. But you are rewarded with a higher slope for doing this. You're rewarded for taking and accepting and living through this risk, and working with your advisors to not have any money that you need in the stock market. You know, they've got you covered. This money that's going up and down, you don't need it right away. But if you can stomach it, you make more returns.
Right, Derek, I can't agree with you more. This really sounds like negativity bias and loss aversion really rearing its ugly head in real life. I mean, I see this all the time when talking to people, where you're absolutely right. It's really difficult in times like you just circled there in the red, like times we're in right now, to see that account balance, the value of those investments dropping. I guess my question I would have for you on this is, how effective is reframing then as a tactic to getting through some of these things, to kind of step back and take a look at that general upward blue trend line that you drew there?
It's very powerful, and it's even more powerful if I could have talked to you last year, because if you can have this reframe ahead of time, then when it happens, because this is very similar to, like somebody in California, they don't try to predict when the next earthquake's going to come. They just live as if there could be an earthquake at any time. And so if we apply that to investing, I don't try to predict when the next downturn is going to be. I just live as if there's going to be another downturn. And if there's not, well, that's good this year, but I know it's going to come at some point. When it does, with the reframe, you can change, I don't like seeing my portfolio value going down, into, I wish I had some more cash so I could invest more in here. So these power of reframes can really change the perspective and drive that home.
Derek, I want to hit on just a moment here as well, just the perspective that you had said about in the moment, right? That is so powerful. When you're sitting there, and this goes back to hindsight or recency or loss, I mean, all the biases, right? You do not know when that's going to end. This downturn is going to end, this volatility is going to end, you do not know. But since the beginning of the stock market, of all markets, we do know that it eventually does end, and it will start to work its way up at some point. And I remember, if we could use the last two examples, I remember in fall of 2018, there were a number of geopolitical events happening, and tariffs and interest rate, a number of different things happening. And the market bottomed in 2018 on Christmas Eve. And it was scary in the moment. And I remember getting emails from clients, Christmas Eve, it's not what we should be thinking about, but that was what was going on and going through everybody's mind. And you fast forward now, today where we are, it's not even a blip on the radar. You wish you had bought in you wish you had lived through all that volatility in 2018 because of where we are now. Now we're experiencing volatility again. 2020, nobody knew in the moment when that bottom in 2020 was going to hit. Nobody knew. Mm-hmm. If you had just been able, like you had said, to stomach it and say and understand, this money I know is meant for a purpose. This is part of the fee that I pay to make bigger returns. I'm going to allow this to do its job. Here we are, even higher. Same at this point in time. We're feeling it. We're experiencing it. It's been a long 9, almost 10 months. But what do all bear markets and all recessions have in common up to this point? They do end, right? And so you just have to understand and see that long-term picture. But it's hard in the moment. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. And making it even harder is the fact that there's a kind of a quote or a saying that good news happens slowly and bad news happens quickly. So to put this a different way, in the long run, with stock market investing, you see that upward slope. You make good money. That's the long run. That what you get, those bigger returns, the benefit, that's in the long run. What you pay, the volatility in the short run, that's the short run. So you're paying in the short run and you're receiving in the long run. Remember, you live in the short run, which is another thing that complicates this, and why it's powerful to reframe and continue to checking in with our beliefs and our automatic thoughts. But it's even worse than this, because remember that the news has a story to sell. So even within the short run, it's the news isn't your friend. They're trying to sell products for their advertisers, and everything is always going to be about what's going to happen with this, what's going to happen if that happens, what's going to happen here, what's going to happen there. You don't know. You don't really know. But make no, this is one guarantee. The news is going to make the stock market look scary. That we can guarantee. But we can take all this. You know all this now. You work with good people, good advisors. But I like to help people zoom out. What are you even investing for? If you zoom out from your investments and take a look at your life, you get to start to ask the question, why am I even investing this money? I mean, it's one thing to say, I've got all this money, it's in the stock market, and it's doing this thing. For what? Why? Because we can start to break from the idea that money is a goal. Sorry, I had a little delay on my clicker here. But money's a tool. It's a useful tool. It's an important tool. It's a tool that we need to know how to use, and you need to care for it. It's a necessary tool, but it's just a tool. It's worthless in and of itself. Money can only be used for something else. And so what is that for you? And this is going to be deeply personal for everybody else, or for every single person. And for people who don't think about this, and most people don't think about it like this, it's easy to do what you think you're supposed to do. And what you think you're supposed to do is keep up with the Joneses, for example, or what you think you're supposed to do is keep making more, never defining enough, just on this endless pursuit of more. And this is when we make decisions based on other people's values. And if we're making decisions based on other people's values, well, then we're not making decisions based on our own values. And you might know somebody who's had some kind of a midlife crisis. This is when people wake up and say, I've been living somebody else's life. I haven't been living in accordance with my values. And so it's a common situation here. People will try to define some inner circle. This is the goals that I have. This is what I want to do. This is the house I want to live in, the school I want to send my kids to, the car I want to drive, and so on. And I work really hard and I get into that inner circle and I look around and I say, well, this feels the same. Well, I must have done it wrong. So then I make a new inner circle and I work really hard to get into that inner circle and it still feels the same. And so I continue down this hedonic treadmill of never being satisfied, never being happy, because I don't really know what this money's for. So what is the money for? I want to use an analogy of a tree here to help think about who you are and what your money needs to do for you. So if I go walking in the woods, say up on the north shore of Lake Superior, I go on a hike and I go into the woods and I see a bunch of trees. And what I mean by see a bunch of trees is I see a bunch of trunks. These are individual trunks. And that trunk represents your social identity. This is who I want you to think I am. This is who you want me to think you are. And I don't mean this to say like we should try to get rid of our social identities. We live in a society, so we have different roles that we have to play. Sometimes we have to be a good boss or a good employee or a good empathetic listener or a good partner and so on. We have identities. But it's knowing who you are underneath all those masks that matters. And when people have an identity crisis, they tend to look up. And when you look up in the forest, you see the canopy. And the canopy kind of represents your worldview. This is how you react with the world. And when you look up, you can't really tell which leaf belongs to which branch, which belongs to which trunk, because our worldviews kind of connect us all, and they're how we relate with each other. But the problem is if a strong enough wind comes through, it's going to shake the whole worldview. It's going to blow the entire canopy away. And in a storm, you might even damage the trunk. But nobody thinks to look down to the roots. And the roots, that's your core identity. That's who you would be if there was nobody left to impress. The root work is well, let me put it this way. If you don't have a strongly developed root system, the smallest breeze or a squirrel jumping on this tree is going to topple the whole thing over. But if you've got a well-developed root system, even if a tornado comes through and rips this thing away, it'll grow back, because knowing who you are, knowing your core identity is at the root of resilience, for example. So when you think about who you are and what would be a meaningful life for you, there's 3 different ways to think about meaning in life, and that is to have a sense of purpose. And this doesn't need to be a big grandiose sense of purpose, to change the world or to save the world or do whatever. This could be cleaning up my neighborhood or raising responsible, independent children, or being a good caretaker to my parents, something like that. But what are you striving for? What's a good use of your time? And then there's another component of this, which is comprehension. Does the world make sense to you? Do things happen in a way that you expect them to happen? And then do you feel like there's value? Do you feel like you're important? And so these are the 3 components of a meaningful life. And these dots represent your sources of meaning. And you can think about your sources of meaning as your personal values. So what are the kinds of things that are important to you? Where do you find meaning? As you look back on your life, what have been the most meaningful events that have happened to you? What are the similar themes that run through all those? Right, so that's how you can start to define what's important to you, do some of that root work, and then you can design a life going forward based on that. And you can ask yourself, well, now that I know what kind of life that I want, and it's going to bring me meaning, what's my money for? And you can develop financial purpose, which this is just a quick mantra, a quick statement that kind of defines what money needs to do for you. Because there's a lot of things that you can do with your money. This isn't even just spending. This is investment decisions. This is where to live, how to earn, how to save. There's a lot of decisions you can make. And if you run those decisions through your financial purpose or your financial purpose statement, some things will come out of the other side. And those things are very important. You give yourself permission to make those decisions because they fit with who you are and what you want to do and what you want to accomplish. But it also gives you permission to let go of all the other things that aren't really all that important to you. Ian, do you have any thoughts, or Thomas?
Sorry, I was on mute there. I was just thinking, this seems like another one of those things that people could actually practically use. And I guess what I would ask here is, how would you go about working with a client to help them kind of think about, their finances in terms of this financial purpose? Because this sounds like it loops in a lot of the things we've been talking about, including going back and reframing, thinking about how we respond to different stimuli and the way that we react, and being kind of more purposeful about the financial decisions that we're making.
Good question. And it's basically helping people understand who they are, where they want to live. And then I have people develop a statement, a short, succinct statement of here's what money needs to do in my life. And this ties neatly back to that ABC model, because as you're making decisions, you can ask yourself, why am I making this decision? And am I doing this because it's something that I think I'm supposed to do? Or am I doing this because it's something that actually will add value to my life or my family's life? And when you do that, you can change you can grow this space between impulse and action, and stimulus and response. And financial purpose helps you grow in that space and help you live a more intentional life. So that's what I have. Here for any questions, the three of us can answer whatever questions you've got coming our way.
That was awesome. We do have a couple of questions that have come through. Derek, that was just, I mean, you and I have gone through that a lot together. We've studied this a lot together, but every time you talk about it a little more, it's really the elephant in the rider. It all goes back to the elephant. Really, really good. So I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that got brought up, and this was a question that I had as well, is if you could just go back to the beginning of your story, Derek, on the debt that you found yourself in, the situation that you found yourself in, even though you're great at math. For our clients out there, maybe their children or people they know that might be struggling with debt, how did you, at that age and at that time of your life, how did you attack that? How do you get rid of that? How do you counsel others to take care of that debt, that problem? Just what was your personal story and background on that, if you could?
Yeah, good question. So the way that I did it is I first got a handle on what was there, right? So you can't do something if you don't know what you're dealing with. So it was getting control of all of the cards that I had and tracking what the interest rate was and how much could I afford to pay off. And there's different schools of thought. So there's a behavioral approach that kind of says you should put all your money towards the lowest balance, because paying off a card, paying off a debt feels good and it provides motivation for the next one. I went with the more, to loop back into the math, I went with the more math version, the cheapest version, which is I attacked the highest interest rate first. And then the whole thing that works here is once you know how much you were spending, and I was spending about, I was right out of college, so this is a lot of money at the time, especially for a 20-year-old kid. I was paying $1,200 a month just to tackle these credit cards. And once a card gets paid off, remember, I'm used to paying $1,200. So the whole $1,200, well, not the whole $1,200, but I keep paying $1,200. So I'm paying just the minimum on all the low interest rate things. All the rest of it, so $1,200 minus what those minimums are, goes towards the highest. Once that kid's paid off, then that rolls over to the next one. It rolls over to the next one. But that works if and only if you know what you're dealing with, and it works better if you can give yourself permission for being human. I could and did feel really stupid because I got myself into this situation, but those aren't very helpful, right? So I feel stupid. That's C. A, what happened? I got myself into credit card debt. What's my belief? Well, I should know better than this. I'm really stupid. Well, I can challenge that belief. Am I really stupid? And what can I do about it? Is there anything in my control? Well, I can't change that anymore. I can do some work going forward. So it's kind of about challenging the story that I'm telling myself about how I shouldn't have gotten into that situation, and it reframes it into, okay, well, that's great, but what can I do about it now?
Yeah, that's awesome. Good story. We did have another one come through about the ABC narrative, and the question is, regarding the B, okay, the belief, is that a signal that more basic needs are not being met, therefore I'm taking impulsive actions, is basically what the question said. So is that it sounds as though if my belief is the markets are going down and I'm gonna, like you had said earlier, it's gonna go to zero, or I'm gonna lose so much money I can't meet any of my basic needs. Is that one of the reasons that we act so impulsively, is what I'm gathering from that question?
That's a fantastic question, and the needs relate closer to the elephant in the rider and this idea of emotional flooding. So there's, depending on the school of thought, 6 basic human needs, and the elephant is more likely to feel threatened if one or more of those basic needs isn't being met. So the falling off or losing control, the rider losing control of the elephant, is more likely to happen if we feel that there's a need that's not being met. That does relate into the belief. So the belief that you have is there in good times and bad times. So that's bigger than a need not being met. But if your need isn't being met, then that will certainly inform a belief that you have. I blew up and slammed a door because my wife told me that I can't go to this event that I wanted to go to. And the story I tell myself is she's taken away my autonomy. And so that's one of my core basic needs. So it is true that your needs will slip their way into those beliefs, and they might even be, most of your beliefs will be related to those basic needs, but it's not just about basic needs.
Yeah, okay. Okay, this is a good one. I'm going to read this. Bear with me as I go through. I want to make sure I get it. So, all right. Could humans be perpetuating this problem? I think this problem is related to psychology around investing your money, because finances are not instinctive and natural, but rather a human-made facet of life. Perhaps we are evolving faster than our physical bodies can keep up. So we created money, we created currency. Is that one of the reasons? And this, if I'm interpreting this wrong, let me know. Is that one of the reasons that maybe we're just not great with it as humans?
Yeah, absolutely. So that would have been a question that I would have asked somebody. That's a fantastic question, and the answer is yes. So there's no equivalent of money in nature. There isn't any at all. There's no functional equivalent of money in nature. So if you trace your family tree back to 100 great grandparents or 200 great grandparents, eventually you're going to get to people who didn't have to use money. And the subconscious part of our mind that hasn't had a software update in 150,000 years, right? So maybe it is advancing, but technology is advancing a lot faster. So yes, 100%. It's not something that comes naturally, and it's a taboo topic, so we can't talk about it. So if I'm struggling, it's not a thing that I'm able to talk about, even though it's not something that comes naturally to me. And think about this: every time or everything that we call good financial habits, it would have been awful to your cave-dwelling ancestors. You're gonna save some of that meat for tomorrow. You're gonna try to invest it. It's gonna get stolen or spoiled. You couldn't do that. You had to share it with the group. So money skills do not come naturally at all. And so there's something that we need to be learned. And there's somebody in our industry who, one of the godfathers of this psychology of money piece, Dick Wagner, the late Dick Wagner, he used to say that there's no functional equivalent of money in nature, but they are the 21st century survival skills. And therein lies the kind of the problem that we face.
You bring up a good point, and we'll end with this because it looks like the questions have stopped coming through. But that whole idea that you had mentioned, you know, in the back in history and your cave dwelling ancestors, we would never have saved meat, right? I read somewhere that one of the reasons that we indulge in sweets so much is our prehistoric brain, because if we had come across a fig tree or something sweet, you know, 150,000 years ago more, we would have not stopped eating it because we may not have known when we would ever come across one again. And so I use that as reinforcement as to why I should never stop eating Oreos, because, you know, my ancestors never would have done that, right? And so is that cognitive dissonance? I think that is I'm just telling myself that it's okay because my ancestors did it. But I always found that interesting, and that's true. Our ancestors would have, but that does not, I mean, rationally, that does not allow me to eat a package of Oreos every day. That's not good for me, but that's the belief I have. So I'm dealing with those consequences.
Yeah, I mean, your ancestors couldn't pick up a supercomputer from their pocket and then tap, tap, tap and have sugar delivered to their door either.
It's true. It's very true. Very fair. Very fair. My own little personal therapy session for the final minutes there. Okay. Awesome. Looks like we're all wrapped up. Ian, any closing remarks from you?
No, I just want to say, Derek, thank you so much for presenting this information. You know, I think it's really insightful, really helpful. You're absolutely right. You know, money is not just math. You know, it is applied mathematics, but because humans are involved in that, then we bring all of this other psychology, everything that's happening kind of under the surface subconsciously to it. And I think you really brought up some important points today to maybe help people kind of rethink how they approach their finances. So I just really appreciate you joining us.
Good. Thanks for having me, both of you.
Derek, awesome. Thank you very much. We'll exit now. And good seeing you again. And thank you everybody for tuning in.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.